Freezing wind howled through the dark pines as a luxury SUV violently braked on a desolate snow-covered mountain pass. My name is Angela, and at 32 years old, I found myself stranded in the unforgiving wilderness of Anchorage immediately after burying my father. The driver of the vehicle was my sister, who stared at me with entirely cold eyes before delivering her final verdict by stating, "This is where it ends for you. The house and the business are mine now." Without giving me a single second to process her vicious betrayal, she forcefully shoved me out of the open passenger door into the thick, freezing snow. She slammed the heavy vehicle door shut and immediately pressed the gas pedal to drive away, without ever looking back at her only sibling. Any normal person would have panicked or collapsed into useless tears of despair while watching those red taillights fade into the lethal blizzard. Instead of breaking down in the wilderness, I calmly unzipped the concealed inner lining of my insulated winter jacket to pull out a fully charged encrypted satellite phone. My sister truly believed she had stripped me of my inheritance, but she had absolutely no idea that my father had meticulously prepared 3 secret contingency plans before his unexpected passing. I gripped the heavy device firmly in my freezing hands and immediately prepared to activate the very first phase of his ultimate financial trap. Before I reveal exactly how I dismantled her stolen maritime empire completely from the shadows, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel right now if you have ever been ruthlessly betrayed by a toxic family member who severely underestimated your true intelligence. The flashing red lights of a 911 patrol car pierced the blinding white night just before I completely lost all feeling in my freezing hands. The emergency rescue team found me collapsing in the unforgiving blizzard and immediately initiated critical hypothermia treatment protocols to stabilize my rapidly dropping body temperature. They wrapped me tightly in heavy thermal blankets and carefully transported me away from that desolate mountain pass straight back to the relative safety of downtown Anchorage. The paramedics asked a few standard questions regarding how I ended up stranded, but I simply blamed a vehicle breakdown to avoid any premature police involvement. I knew getting the authorities involved at this early stage would only give my sister Pamela the legal advantage she desperately wanted. As soon as I unlocked the heavy steel door to my apartment, which was entirely retrofitted with state-of-the-art computer servers, I immediately grabbed my encrypted communication device. I urgently contacted my best friend Felix because I desperately needed his specialized network engineering assistance to establish a highly secure hidden satellite connection. He answered the secure line on the second ring with a voice full of legitimate concern. "Tell me you are safe because the storm tracking radar over your location looks absolutely..." "Catastrophic right now," Felix said through the static of the encrypted channel. "I survived the cold, but we do not have much time before they solidify their hostile takeover of the corporate office." I replied while simultaneously booting up my primary workstation. "I need you to bounce my signal through the European proxy servers immediately so I can bypass the Merit network servers to guarantee absolute anonymity. Technical support securing my external perimeter. I initiated a complex sequence to breach the digital architecture of the international shipping manifests and employee portals like a ghost returning to haunt its own house." My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard as I systematically disabled their rudimentary tracking software before they could even detect a foreign presence inside their mainframe. I officially activated Plan A by deploying a highly sophisticated invisible firewall directly into the foundational code of the company network. This specific malicious script was meticulously designed to permanently lock the executive leadership out of the core ship dispatch system, while simultaneously making it appear as a routine server maintenance glitch. Whenever anyone in the upper management tier attempted to authorize a cargo departure from the Anchorage port, the system would automatically trap their credentials in an endless loading loop. Pamela would absolutely lose her mind when she realized her newly stolen administrative access was entirely useless to actually operate the massive fleet of cargo ships. The sheer brilliance of my father was embedding this secret backdoor access specifically for me, years before his health began to decline. Once my shadow monitoring framework was perfectly integrated into their mainframe, I opened a hidden diagnostic window to observe the live flow of corporate capital. The digital ledger illuminated my darkened room with cold blue light as I successfully intercepted the very first batch of highly suspicious financial transactions. Someone with top-tier executive clearance was systematically routing massive operational funds away from legitimate ship maintenance accounts into completely untraceable offshore shell corporations. The sheer volume of these fraudulent wire transfers proved beyond any doubt that the maritime empire was actively being bled dry from the inside out. I watched the numbers refreshing on my screen, while realizing that this was a carefully orchestrated corporate pillaging operation planned while my father was lying in his hospital bed. I spent the remainder of the night meticulously cataloging every single fraudulent digital signature they carelessly left behind in the corporate registry. They mistakenly believed that throwing me out into a deadly winter storm would permanently silence my voice, but they had just given me the ultimate administrative power to shatter their illusion whenever I deemed it necessary. 3 days after the funeral, the atmosphere inside the sprawling Anchorage Maritime Transport headquarters became tense to the point of absolute suffocation for everyone remaining on the corporate payroll. Pamela officially convened an emergency board meeting in the primary glass conference room, where she brazenly declared herself the undisputed chairman of the entire commercial empire. She immediately initiated a ruthless executive purge by systematically terminating every single senior director who had demonstrated any historical loyalty to the original founder of the shipping company. The terrified employees could only watch in absolute silence as seasoned maritime professionals were unceremoniously escorted out of the building by heavily armed private security contractors. During this incredibly hostile gathering, she proudly announced the unprecedented promotion of my father's former assistant Howard, elevating him directly to the prestigious position of Chief Operating Officer. This highly calculated appointment was entirely designed to place a completely obedient puppet in charge of the daily maritime logistics so they could effortlessly manipulate the intricate accounting ledgers. Howard accepted his unearned position with a sickeningly arrogant smile, while silently preparing to execute the fraudulent financial strategies they had secretly developed over the past few months. The blatantly corrupt corporate restructuring instantly provoked a furious reaction from the highly respected Chief Financial Officer Denise, who absolutely refused to tolerate the sudden destruction of her beloved department. She stood up abruptly to slam her hands against the polished mahogany table before delivering a scorching vocal reprimand to the newly declared corporate monarch sitting across from her. Where exactly are these unauthorized expenses for millions of dollars going? Because you two are actively destroying this entire company with these ridiculous phantom shipping fleets. Pamela simply leaned back in her expensive leather chair and offered a terrifyingly cold smirk before directly addressing the furious financial expert across the massive boardroom table. You are officially fired from this organization, Denise, so pack your personal belongings and evacuate the premises immediately before I summon the security team to physically remove you. The swift and brutal public elimination of the only honest executive remaining in the building successfully cleared the path for their massive embezzlement operation to proceed without any further internal opposition. Howard wasted absolutely no time abusing his newly acquired administrative authority by aggressively approving dozens of completely fraudulent maintenance contracts for commercial vessels that did not actually exist anywhere in the fleet. He continuously funneled millions of dollars away from the legitimate operating budget straight into their secret offshore accounts under the absolute, undeniable protection of the new chairman. These fabricated maritime logistical expenses were brilliantly disguised as emergency winter repairs for the cargo ships currently navigating the treacherous frozen waters of the Alaskan coastline. They believed they were brilliant criminal masterminds orchestrating the perfect corporate heist while assuming nobody possessed the technical capability to challenge their newly established authority over the maritime empire. From the impenetrable safety of my hidden digital sanctuary across the frozen city, I silently monitored every single malicious modification they made to the corporate cash flow. The advanced shadow network I had successfully embedded into their mainframe allowed me to capture the entirety of this devastating corporate rot in absolute real time without triggering a single security alarm. I meticulously recorded their blatant financial theft as undeniable digital evidence, while they foolishly celebrated their temporary victory inside that luxurious corporate skyscraper, completely unaware of my invisible presence. Every fraudulent keystroke they made was instantly archived onto my secure, encrypted servers to ensure their eventual criminal prosecution would be absolutely inescapable when the final trap finally detonated. I calmly drank my black coffee while watching their stolen wealth accumulate on my glowing monitors because I knew their monumental arrogance was slowly digging their own federal prison cells. Exactly one evening following that shocking corporate termination decision, I received a highly encrypted anonymous communication signal pinging directly across my secure secondary network interface. Despite possessing complete administrative control over the digital corporate mainframe, I fully recognized that computerized spreadsheets alone lacked the devastating legal weight required to secure a conviction in a strict federal court. I desperately needed to acquire the original physical documents bearing their actual wet signatures to definitively prove malicious intent and formally establish an undeniable federal criminal conspiracy against the maritime empire. Relying exclusively on digital server logs would simply allow their highly paid defense attorneys to argue that a nameless hacker had maliciously manipulated the accounting software without their direct knowledge. To secure this critical physical evidence, I immediately arranged a completely clandestine face-to-face meeting with Denise at an abandoned commercial container port located on the freezing industrial outskirts of Anchorage. We deliberately chose this desolate environment specifically because the towering rusted shipping containers created a perfect labyrinth that remained entirely hidden from the expansive surveillance camera network monitoring the active commercial docks. The remote location provided the absolute operational security we needed to exchange stolen corporate property without alerting the private security forces currently patrolling the main headquarters. The freezing Alaskan wind whipped aggressively across the frozen concrete as Denise cautiously approached my vehicle, while shivering violently and pulling her thick winter coat collar tightly up around her frozen neck. She looked incredibly tense while frantically scanning the empty, dark shadows surrounding our isolated position before finally reaching deep inside her coat pocket to retrieve a heavy, metallic object. I always knew Pamela would eventually try to permanently eliminate me from the corporate hierarchy, so I secretly backed up the entirety of their black market transaction records right before the armed security guards forced me to leave the building. I reached out to firmly accept the freezing digital flash drive from her trembling fingers while looking directly into her exhausted eyes with an expression of absolute, unwavering determination regarding our upcoming battle. Thank you for risking absolutely everything tonight, Denise, because these original financial documents will absolutely serve as the final, undeniable nail securing the heavy lid of their impending federal coffin. Taking a deep breath of the freezing night air, Denise meticulously explained exactly how Howard had been systematically forging international customs declarations to bypass standard maritime shipping regulations. She detailed his highly illegal process of signing massive, unsecured commercial loans under the corporate name to artificially inflate the apparent revenue while simultaneously creating catastrophic financial black holes inside the company ledger. They were aggressively utilizing these illegally acquired banking funds to desperately cover the massive operational discrepancies caused by their bottomless corporate greed and lavish personal spending habits. The sheer magnitude of their fraudulent borrowing practically guaranteed the eventual total bankruptcy of the maritime company my father had spent 40 years building from the ground up. Standing together in the freezing, desolate shadows of that abandoned shipping yard, we officially established a highly formidable secret alliance, forged entirely through our mutual desire for ultimate legal justice. We silently swore to weaponize every single piece of devastating financial evidence contained within that drive to completely obliterate the dirty corporate empire Pamela and Howard were currently attempting to construct. We fully understood that their monumental arrogance would blind them to our impending attack until it was far too late for them to mount any viable legal defense against the federal fraud charges. The meticulous collection of this undeniable physical proof transformed our defensive strategy into an incredibly aggressive offensive campaign designed to dismantle their stolen lives entirely. 1 week before the highly anticipated initial public offering of the Maritime Corporation, the massive volume of encrypted data extracted from the flash drive securely provided by Denise finally began demonstrating its absolute destructive potential. The sheer amount of falsified documents required intense scrutiny to fully comprehend the actual terrifying depth of their incredible deception. Following several exhausting, sleepless nights spent meticulously analyzing thousands of scanned legal pages, I successfully discovered a highly classified borrowing scheme they desperately tried to bury deep inside the corporate archives. Pamela and Howard had secretly authorized borrowing tens of millions of dollars from aggressive private equity funds to desperately conceal the massive operational deficits they intentionally created. The sheer magnitude of their fraudulent borrowing practically guaranteed the eventual total bankruptcy of the maritime company unless they successfully secured the massive influx of public investment capital from the upcoming stock launch. The truly fatal legal vulnerability I identified buried deep within the complex financial terminology was that these ruthless investment firms strictly demanded a comprehensive cross-collateralization agreement before releasing any operational capital. This specific contractual clause legally bound the massive corporate debts directly to the individual people serving as the primary financial guarantors for the institutional loans. They carelessly assumed the corporate veil would permanently protect their personal wealth from any future legal liability, while they continued draining the operational budget for their selfish luxury expenses. They never bothered to read the fine print, because their overwhelming greed completely blinded them to the strict standard institutional lending requirements. Recognizing this unprecedented opportunity, I officially decided to activate Plan B, utilizing my hidden administrative network privileges to execute the most devastating financial trap humanly imaginable. I methodically manipulated the internal digital registry to legally assign the full repayment responsibility for this astronomical debt directly onto the personal assets, including the luxury mansions and private bank accounts belonging exclusively to Pamela and Howard. They mistakenly believed they were safely spending anonymous corporate funds, but I transformed their stolen money into a highly toxic personal liability that would ultimately destroy their entire existence without offering any chance for legal escape. While carefully typing the complex encryption sequences required to solidify the digital trap, I smiled coldly at my glowing computer monitors inside the darkened Anchorage apartment. You desperately wanted to steal absolutely everything our father spent his entire life building from the ground up. I muttered quietly to the empty room while finalizing the final administrative execution command. Then you must fully prepare to pay for that unbelievable level of arrogance with your own miserable financial life. I flawlessly synchronized these altered mortgage profiles directly into the highly secure server systems maintained by the primary lending institutions without triggering any external alarms or raising suspicious red flags. I utilized advanced cryptographic algorithms to permanently lock their digital access credentials to guarantee absolutely nobody could ever modify the records or revoke the impending asset freezing protocols. The institutional banks now legally recognized Pamela and Howard as the sole individual guarantors, fully responsible for repaying the tens of millions of dollars they had fraudulently acquired. The catastrophic personal debt bomb was now perfectly positioned deep within the financial architecture of their stolen empire, while silently ticking down toward absolute zero. It waited patiently in the dark shadows for the prestigious initial public offering event to begin so it could detonate violently and completely, eradicate the stolen wealth accumulated by those miserable traitors. Their monumental arrogance prevented them from noticing the lethal digital snare wrapping tightly around their throats as they continued blindly preparing for their fraudulent moment of public corporate glory under the bright stadium lights. With only 2 days remaining before the highly anticipated financial event, the entire Anchorage Maritime headquarters was completely submerged in ridiculous, ostentatious preparations for the upcoming initial public offering. Pamela aggressively dispatched a massive series of highly provocative VIP invitations, directly targeting the most powerful maritime tycoons and ruthless corporate investors operating across the entire western seaboard. She possessed an overwhelming psychological ambition to aggressively mobilize an astronomical influx of fresh public institutional capital, specifically designed to permanently legitimize the millions of dollars they had already stolen from the operational budget. She firmly believed that securing these massive investment contracts would successfully wash their dirty money clean, while simultaneously elevating her personal status into the highest echelons of the international shipping industry. While sitting completely alone in front of my glowing surveillance monitors, I suddenly realized a highly problematic legal flaw regarding the overall execution of my current digital retaliation strategy. I deeply understood that Plan A and Plan B were fundamentally financial weapons, which meant Pamela could potentially manipulate her protective corporate liability veil to severely delay the inevitable civil litigation through years of exhausting courtroom battles. She possessed enough stolen capital to hire armies of defense lawyers capable of burying the truth underneath endless mountains of procedural paperwork until the authorities eventually lost interest in prosecuting her crimes. Right inside that frustrating moment of strategic gridlock, I vividly recalled the incredibly cryptic final instructions my father had desperately whispered to me while resting on his hospital bed just days before his tragic passing. He firmly directed me to immediately locate his longtime personal attorney and most trusted lifelong confidant, George, to successfully secure the ultimate legal failsafe protecting his magnificent maritime legacy from absolute hostile destruction. I immediately grabbed my heavy winter coat and drove my vehicle directly through the freezing Alaskan weather toward the highly formal downtown legal office belonging to George to urgently present the undeniable digital evidence I had meticulously collected. After patiently reviewing the stolen corporate ledgers and carefully listening to my detailed chronological explanation regarding their massive corporate embezzlement operation, he offered a solemn nod of absolute confirmation regarding the brilliant defensive foresight my father had secretly demonstrated before his death. George slowly stood up from his heavy mahogany desk to carefully open a massive steel wall safe concealed entirely behind a beautiful framed painting before extracting a highly encrypted digital flash drive. He solemnly handed the small metallic device across the polished wooden desk while speaking with an incredibly stern vocal tone that heavily echoed throughout the quiet, professional legal office. This specific encrypted drive contains Plan C, which your father explicitly instructed, must only be unleashed upon the public when every single stage spotlight is directed squarely at Pamela. I tightly gripped the freezing metallic USB containing my father's final recorded testamentary will, while giving the older gentleman an absolutely unwavering nod of complete understanding regarding the impending corporate destruction. I completely understand your strict instructions, because I will personally ensure the entire financial world clearly witnesses her true deceitful face during the upcoming corporate conference night. I finally departed from that quiet legal sanctuary, possessing a completely renewed sense of absolute, unwavering confidence regarding the impending corporate battlefield awaiting us all at the maritime headquarters. The ultimate devastating legal puzzle piece was now resting securely inside my coat pocket, while remaining absolutely primed for the spectacular night of public judgment approaching rapidly on the freezing horizon. I knew without any hesitation that the shocking contents hidden within this tiny metallic device would instantly shatter her fabricated reality and permanently terminate her fraudulent reign over the shipping empire. That Friday evening, the massive Anchorage Maritime Trading Hall completely sparkled with the relentless camera flashes belonging to the international financial media and the most powerful transportation tycoons. Pamela wore a ridiculously expensive emerald designer evening gown while proudly stepping onto the center mahogany podium, holding a custom gold-plated fountain pen in her trembling right hand. She enthusiastically prepared to officially sign the historic initial public offering registration documents that would supposedly legitimize her fraudulent corporate empire forever in the eyes of the global market. Operating from the darkened audio-visual control booth located on the elevated mezzanine level, I successfully bypassed the internal hotel network firewall without triggering a single security alert. I systematically severed the primary microphone audio feed right as she opened the leather binder and directly unleashed Plan C onto the towering high-definition LED screens suspended directly behind the grand stage. The crystal-clear video recording of my father instantly illuminated the massive auditorium, while his deeply stern voice echoed perfectly through the expensive surround sound speakers surrounding the stunned audience. The entire luxurious room fell into a terrifying dead silence as the legendary founder of the Maritime Corporation looked directly into the camera lens to deliver his final devastating judgment. If I pass away suddenly, you must know it was absolutely not a natural accident, because I hereby permanently revoke all inheritance rights from Pamela and transfer total executive authority directly to Angela. The entire prestigious auditorium instantly exploded into absolute chaotic pandemonium as the wealthy institutional investors finally realized the catastrophic magnitude of the corporate deception unfolding right before their eyes. A highly influential logistics chief executive officer stood up abruptly from his front row seat to aggressively point his finger directly at her incredibly pale and terrified face. You are blatantly defrauding every single investor in this room because this entire maritime company is completely drowning in hidden institutional debt and massive accounting fraud. Immediately following the devastating video conclusion, I aggressively projected the meticulously compiled financial spreadsheets, definitively proving Howard had ruthlessly embezzled millions of corporate dollars into his untraceable offshore accounts. I highlighted the fabricated vendor invoices in bright red digital ink, so every single financial reporter in the room could clearly photograph the undeniable evidence of his monumental corporate theft. I simultaneously displayed the highly classified institutional banking records, confirming Pamela had foolishly utilized her massive personal estate as the primary collateral for those incredibly toxic commercial loans. The surrounding wealthy investors immediately panicked upon seeing the undeniable digital evidence and frantically utilized their cell phones to permanently cancel every single pending financial agreement they had previously negotiated. They aggressively pushed their way toward the heavy exit doors while shouting furious demands for immediate legal representation regarding the fraudulent investment contracts they almost blindly signed earlier tonight. Pamela experienced a complete psychological collapse right there on the illuminated stage, while screaming uncontrollably at the massive digital screens displaying her ultimate financial and personal ruin to the world. She completely lost her fragile grip on reality and violently lunged down the stage stairs, desperately attempting to physically attack me through the thick glass windows of the sound booth. The heavily armed private security forces immediately intercepted her chaotic charge and forcefully pinned her expensive designer gown directly against the polished hardwood floor to prevent any further physical violence. She thrashed wildly against the heavy grip of the security guards while screaming incredibly vicious threats that only further cemented her profound public humiliation in front of the flashing cameras. Her absolute mental breakdown in front of the international financial press effectively destroyed the beloved public offering ceremony she had spent several arrogant months desperately planning to execute tonight. The deafening sirens from the approaching fleet of police vehicles completely suffocated the chaotic noise echoing inside the massive glass skyscraper. Heavily armed federal agents from the Financial Crimes Division aggressively stormed into the luxurious trading hall alongside local law enforcement officers to execute emergency federal arrest warrants. They bypassed the panicked wealthy investors to directly apprehend the criminal suspects standing near the shattered remains of their highly publicized initial public offering presentation. The lead federal investigator loudly charged both Pamela and Howard with massive securities fraud and egregious corporate embezzlement, while dozens of international media cameras captured their absolute public humiliation. Howard immediately collapsed onto the polished hardwood floor in a state of paralyzing terror, while begging the federal agents for a completely impossible leniency agreement. Thanks entirely to the brilliant cross-collateralization debt trap successfully established during the execution of Plan B, the institutional lending banks immediately initiated supercars within minutes of receiving the automated fraud alerts generated by my secure network. The bank seized every single offshore bank account and personal investment portfolio, which effectively pushed the two greedy traders into a permanent state of absolute financial destitution. They were forced to face the overwhelming reality that their monstrous ambition had successfully erased their entire personal fortunes without leaving a single penny for their upcoming criminal defense. Once the overwhelming corporate chaos finally settled and the international press evacuated the premises, I utilized the undeniable legal authority granted by Plan C to officially assume full executive control over the Maritime Transportation Company. I immediately terminated the remaining corrupt board members who blindly supported the fraudulent regime before formally inviting Denise to return to the corporate headquarters as the official chief financial officer. We stood together inside the silent grand auditorium and collaboratively promised to begin reconstructing the severely damaged logistical empire based entirely on absolute transparency and rigorous operational integrity. I walked outside into the freezing Alaskan night to stand silently on the snow-covered sidewalk, watching the flashing police cruiser transport Pamela away toward a miserable federal holding facility. I watched her terrified face pressing against the barred glass window without feeling a single ounce of familial regret regarding the spectacular destruction of her stolen corporate throne. I consciously decided to completely sever all remaining blood relations without offering any pathetic reconciliation or unearned mercy because I deeply preferred letting the strict federal justice system severely punish her ruthlessly toxic greed. The most profound lesson woven throughout this entire maritime corporate battle is centered entirely around the absolute necessity of maintaining strict emotional discipline. When faced with an incredibly vicious betrayal from your own blood relatives, your natural instinct might push you toward initiating loud shouting matches or desperately seeking their immediate personal validation. Giving into those impulsive reactions only surrenders your inherent power directly to those toxic individuals who actively want to see you fail. Instead, you must calculate your defensive strategy quietly in the shadows, while meticulously gathering undeniable physical proof of their malicious wrongdoing. True enduring strength always lies in allowing a deeply arrogant narcissist to blindly build their own inescapable trap, while you patiently hold the ultimate key ensuring their spectacular legal and financial destruction. Thank you for sticking around to witness the spectacular conclusion of this incredible story regarding ultimate corporate justice. If you have ever had to